views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. If you talk to people in the Bronx who are interested in the political scene, and many of us have shown that we are, especially given the turnout from the last election and the level of interest in the number of candidates we have running in special elections and then ultimately in the primary, you know that it is a very big topic that's on everybody's mind. And in fact, one of the questions that a lot of people are going like this, saying, what is it all about, is ranked choice voting. And so we're going to start with that this evening and then get into a number of other issues about the upcoming elections. So let me just get right to it and say welcome to the Director of Policy and Research for the New York City Campaign Finance Board. It is Allie Swatek. Nice to have you with us, Ms. Swatek.
Thank you so much for having me.
And the Northeast Director of Civic Engagement for the NALEO Educational Fund, it is Juan Rosa. Mr. Rosa, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Gary. A pleasure to be talking to you and your viewers.
Just so that people know, the NALEO is the National Association of Latino elected and appointed officials who are advocates for free and fair access to voting for Latino communities. And maybe a more familiar face to many people in the Bronx is New York State Assemblyman Jeff Dinowitz from the 81st Assembly District. Assemblyman has been really at the forefront of legislation on voting, and through his long career in office has been very concerned that we have fair and effective elections. So, Assemblyman, nice to have you with us.
Always good to be here.
Let's talk with Ms. Swatek to start. It seems very simple, and I know you do this a lot. What is ranked choice voting, and what do everyday voters need to know?
Yeah, so ranked choice voting is a new way for New York City voters to elect their local representatives. And when I say local representatives, I'm talking about the city offices of mayor, public advocate, comptroller, borough president, and city council. And instead of choosing just one candidate in your primary or special election for those offices, voters can choose up to 5 and rank them in order of preference. So what we've been telling voters is what we've seen in jurisdictions who implement ranked choice voting is that it gives voters more say in who wins. It increases civility between candidates. So it kind of changes a little bit how candidates campaign with each other. And it also can lead to more diverse representation. So voters elect people who more reflect the population of the city. And that's what we've seen in other jurisdictions.
I think a very logical question for somebody who's just learning about the concept from us here on this program is, well, wait a minute. So why am I doing 1 through 5? And, under what circumstance does 2 through 5 come into play that number 1 doesn't, become elected?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing for voters to know, just first and foremost, is the ballot is going to kind of look like a grid. If you've taken a standardized test in elementary school or high school, you fill in a bubble on a Scantron. The ballot kind of looks like that. The candidates that are on the ballot are listed in rows. At the very top of each of the columns, there's 5 of them, is first choice, second choice, third choice, fourth choice, fifth choice. So the way that you fill out the ballot, it's really simple. You bubble in the oval next to the candidate name that you want to choose in the appropriate row that you want to rank them. And the reason why you want to rank candidates, why you want to rank 1, 2, 3, 4, and fifth choice, is because if your first choice candidate loses a ranked choice voting round, your vote moves to your second choice.
What does that mean, loses the ranked choice voting round? I mean, I know what it is, but I'll have you articulate it.
Yes.
Like they get less than 50% of the total vote.
Yes. So the way it works is voters fill out their ballot, but then all voters' first choices are tabulated by the Board of Elections. And if one candidate in that race has over 50% of the vote, they automatically win. It means that even if we went through the ranked choice voting round tabulation, no one could get more votes than that person once they have over 50%. That's just, the way the percentages work, right? So if a candidate gets over 50%, they win. If no candidate gets over 50%, that's when the ranked choice voting ranks 2, 3, 4, and 5 on voters' ballots come into effect, because the candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated, and the voters who voted for that candidate see their second choice vote counted.
So then you would have another runoff between, I'll welcome Juan Rosa in by saying numero uno and numero dos, right? From number 1 and number 2, right? Is that's what we're talking about?
So there is no runoff. The ranked choice voting eliminates all runoff elections, but it basically replicates in real time what the runoffs are trying to achieve. The ranked choice voting tabulation process goes through all of the rounds until you end up with 2 candidates at the end, and the candidate with the most votes is the winner. So the runoff doesn't take place between each round. It happens at the very last round, if you want to think about it that way.
Mr. Rosa, you spend a lot of time working on voter education, and not only for ranked choice voting, but for voting in general. Talk to me about the potential for disenfranchisement, the potential confusion over what we've just heard, and what your concerns are for Latino voters who are so prominent and so important in the borough of the Bronx, especially.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gary. And first of all, we always like to remind folks that the Bronx is really important to the NALEO Educational Fund, because the Bronx is the only majority Latino county in all the Northeast United States. So for us, it's very important to be working in the Bronx. We are appreciative of Allie and everybody at the CFB for the work that they're doing, going to every corner of the city to educate voters about this new way of voting. We know, Gary, to your question, that Latino voters still face challenges accessing very simple election information. For example, registration deadlines, poll site locations, changing party registration. Just so you know, we operate a hotline. It's called the Ve y Vota hotline, Go and Vote. It operates from 8:30 in the morning to 8 p.m. at night. And voters can call in and get information that they require. On election day that just passed in November, we had about 3,000 calls from voters, and 86% of those calls were just on very simple questions about the location of the poll site. Can they vote? So given that, Gary, we know that the Latino community still faces a lot of challenges to access very simple information about the vote. So we're going out, partnering with the CFB and other partners here in the Bronx and throughout the city to make sure that we're going with information where voters feel more comfortable getting information from.
There's no secret that in the presidential election, the Latino vote was prominent. The Latinos came out to vote. I stood online in the Bronx, and I know what I saw, and they were out to vote. But you still feel like there's a void. You still feel like you're not getting to all the people that you need to get to.
That is absolutely right. For one thing, we know that even political campaigns tend not to invest a lot of monies in reaching the Latino community. We know, and that's true of both parties, the Democrats and the Republicans really sometimes fail to reach the Latino community to invest because of assumptions that are made about the Latino vote or the localities where the Latino vote is concentrated. The Latino vote in the United States is mostly concentrated in New York, California, Texas, and Arizona. And there are certain assumptions that are made about those localities. And therefore, we see that presidential elections, presidential primaries, tend not to really invest in the Latino vote. And that's really true at all levels. Again, we do see that there's a potential for disenfranchisement in the sense that information may not get to people that need it the most. And that's why we're glad to be working with the CFB and our other partners to make sure that we address that.
Give me the one tactic that you use to break through that educational, informational void. Like, what's the main thing that you do to reach voters?
So there's two. We know from research that we've done on prior issues, like the census, that Latinos still get a lot of their information from the news, from media. So we're fortunate to have wonderful partners Univision and Telemundo that routinely come to us when they have when they want to talk about voting issues or other issues. So that's our main one of our main platforms. Another one is just, again, going where voters are. So we do a lot of, here in New York City, we do a lot of work with public schools. We do a lot of work with programs that work in public schools. So we make sure that we're addressing parents and guardians and even students with information about voting.
Of course, that's a bigger challenge. Everything's a challenge now with the pandemic. When you mentioned partners, media partners, I didn't hear BronxNet, but I know that you meant to say that. I could appreciate that because that's what we're doing this evening. Assemblyman, let's just get your opinion on the whole concept. And then the viewers don't know, but before the program, you asked some, the kinds of questions that a legislator should ask. And so let's start with what do you think of this system? Is this a good idea? Is it a bad idea? Does it work? Will it not work? What do you think?
I hope it works. We haven't experienced it yet. The only thing close to it is the old, often corrupt school board elections, which we had up until, I guess, the beginning of the millennium. And in the school board elections, it was the same kind of system, except there were handwritten ballots. We actually write in the numbers. You voted for your candidates in order, and then what happens is they count how many number one votes each candidate got. They drop the lowest candidate and redistribute that candidate's votes to whoever was number two on that ballot, and they kept doing it successively until there was only enough winners. In that case, it was 9 winners. In this case, it will be 1 winner. The problem I'm worried about is that a lot of people will lose their votes. Now, if somebody votes for 2 candidates as number one, as we know, their ballot, when you go to vote, the machine will reject it. You'll get a second bite at the apple. However, what I'm concerned about is the people who vote by absentee ballot, and these days it's a very high percentage, partially thanks to laws which I passed. If somebody who votes by absentee votes for 2 number ones, I believe they're going to lose their vote, period. I don't know that there's any mechanism for them not to lose their vote, and that's a big concern. So I'm not against this process. I'm not speaking for it. I'm just pointing out the concerns I have. The other concern is this.
Well, let's just address that for a moment. If that happens and you are concerned about them losing their vote, is there an antidote to that? And then we'll bring Ms. Swatek in.
I don't know of any. We created antidotes for people who don't who don't sign their absentee ballot envelope, for example, who don't date it. Previously, those would have been rejected. Now people can correct it. But the actual vote inside the envelope, I don't know that there's any legal way for them to correct that. And therefore, I'm assuming that those people will lose their votes. And I guarantee you there's going to be a bunch of people who are going to make that mistake because it's an easy mistake to make, and it's a new system, but maybe I'm wrong. You tell me.
And one of the things that we're doing this evening is the antidote to that, I suppose, in that the more people know about it, that's the way. Ms. Swatek, did you want to weigh in before we get the Assemblyman's next point?
Yeah, the Assemblyman is correct that you can create a cure process for the absentee ballot envelope because you haven't opened the ballot yet, but because we have ballot secrecy and you want to ensure that folks, their votes are anonymized, once the ballot is open, there really is no way to associate the ballot back with the voter in an absentee ballot situation. So the Assemblyman is right. I think that you're also right, Gary, by pointing out that education and including a really robust set of instructions in the absentee ballot mailer to make sure that people know the correct way to mark their ballot and what could happen if they don't mark their ballot correctly is really important. I know that the Board of Elections is working on including more visualizations of what an incorrectly marked ballot looks like and kind of, like including like a red X mark next to it to be like, don't do this, and then an explanation of why. So that's definitely something that they're thinking about, and it's in the process of being created, and it is something I'm concerned about as well.
That's interesting.
Improvement, by the way, on the absentee ballot. But think about it. A lot of people made mistakes on something simple as not signing their name, even though the instructions were there. Think about the mistakes that could possibly be made in terms of the ranked choice. That's what concerns me. But I have another concern as well. Go
ahead. Well, go ahead. Do that.
So
sure.
I saw the ballot that they used in the recent Queen's special election. So I think there were 8 candidates, so something like that. So 8 candidates down in one column. Then you have 5 columns, as you just explained, where people can do their rankings. Think about the June primary. Right now, there are, I don't know, 15, 20 candidates for mayor. You'll have candidates for public advocate. Several candidates are running for comptroller, borough president candidates, and city council candidates. That'll take at least 2 pages of ballots just for those positions. However, there are other offices up for grabs around the city, judgeships, party positions, DA in Manhattan, for example. Those have to be on separate ballots. Why? Because those aren't elected for ranked choice. So the voters are going to be asked to vote for the municipal positions with ranked choice voting, and everything else not with ranked choice voting. If that doesn't confuse people, I don't know what could. There's no question in my mind that the balloting will be on at least 3 pages, maybe more. Definitely pages.
I will follow up with maybe a yes or no answer. Do you have confidence that the Board of Elections can manage all of this? That's pretty complicated, even tabulation ultimately that has to take place.
I think the Board of Elections is capable of doing it. More often than not, the problems that they have relate to the lack of funding. For example, the delays in counting absentee ballots are directly related to the fact that they didn't have enough people to do it. How do you get more people? You got to pay for it. Where do you get the money? The money has to be allocated. So some of the very same people who complain about the board, and I'm not here to defend the board, are the very same people who don't provide them with enough money to do their job.
Mr. Rosa, you listened to this. You heard what we were just talking about. I suppose this underscores your rather large level of concerns, because now you're talking about another language. You're talking about people who may never have voted before, who now feel inspired by the climate that everybody now is participating, which is, of course, what we want. So do you have any concerns based on what you just heard? Or is it really back to the same thing? We just got to get the word out.
So in a sense, yes. So one thing that we also like to remind folks is that the Latino community is very, it's not monolithic. It's very heterogeneous. And one of the things is that a lot of Latinos don't even speak Spanish anymore, right? They're, 5th, 6th generation, and they don't really even speak Spanish. So the Latino community is very diverse within itself. But the Assemblyman's concern does underscore why it's so necessary to talk to the Latino community about all the options they have for safe voting. So when we talk to the Latino voters, we just don't highlight one voting form over the other. We always try to talk to them about all the ways that they can vote safely, especially during this pandemic.
Ms. Swatek, I want to ask you about this. This came up in a couple of articles I read, that some of the candidates are looking at partnership campaigns, like, in other words, vote for me and vote for my buddy, and then we can be 1 and 2. Is that something that you would encourage, or is that like a wrinkle that we hadn't thought about and said, well, wait a minute, now all of a sudden we got teams voting, and then that would start to suggest that various powers that be could start to manipulate things.
So it's not surprising. It's actually kind of part of the design of ranked choice voting. So it was kind of what I hinted at the beginning in my original answer to what is ranked choice voting. We find that candidates do change the way that they campaign. So you see more civility. You even see some folks talking positively about the people that are running against them. And the reason is really clear. You have to ask for your opponent's second choice votes. Basically, you have to talk to their supporters and say, you may be voting for this, you may be voting for Juan first, but vote for me second. So you see more civility, and voters end up hearing from more candidates too, because you can't just win with your base voters, your first choice voters. You need to get those second choice, even those third choice votes. So we see some interesting things happening. I've been fascinated by the mayoral forums. They've started incorporating the question of who would you vote for second into those forums. And I think that's really interesting.
I have to really think about it as a voter. If a candidate said, well, I like this guy too, would it make me say, well, wait a minute, aren't you confident about number one, winning, and number two, doing the job yourself? I mean, I don't know.
I think one thing I would say about that is that I've frequently found as a voter that I have multiple candidates who I like and who I would be totally fine with winning. So it's a matter of, I say this a lot, Juan will probably hear this for the third time this week, but you vote for your favorite candidate first, you vote for your second favorite candidate second, you vote for your third favorite candidate third, and then you don't have to vote for anybody else after that point if you don't have any more favorite candidates.
You know, and really it comes to play now. I mean, because I've been surveying who's out there for the two special elections coming up in the Bronx. One of them has 6 candidates and the other one has 10. Of course, we're
10,
trying to
yeah.
figure out how to do debates in those races. I don't know how you do it. We've done it before, but 10.
That's very hard to do. But if I could chime in.
Yes, please do.
I think it's kind of exciting being able to have more choices in that sense. And I hope this works out in a positive way. But, you know, when you say, you know, people team up, the positive spin on that is people team up and work together. The negative spin is that some candidates make backroom deals with each other. So it really depends on how you look at it. One thing I'm concerned about, though, and this would be most unfortunate, is if candidates start grouping together based on, you know, ethnicity or race or gender or anything like that. People should work together based upon the merit, based upon, you know, who the best candidates are. But the new system, I think, kind of really allows for these
Maybe encourages that. But so let's bring Mr. Rosa in, who deals with ethnicity and voting. That's an interesting thing, and I suppose you would not complain, and many Bronx voters wouldn't complain if, let's say, you know, Hispanic candidates got together. But do you understand the Assemblyman's concern that, well, wait a minute, ethnicity is important. It may not be the only item that brings people together.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that again, we like to remind people we talk to is that, you know, New York City's experiment in ranked choice voting really has no equal, right? It's really going to be the largest jurisdiction to try this. It's going to be the most ethnically diverse, the most economically diverse of all, you know, the places that have tried ranked choice voting. San Francisco really being the next most equal to us. And so one thing that we like to remind people is that there's a lot to analyze, a lot to study, a lot to work with after voters engage with, and candidates engage with ranked choice voting. So we're not ready yet to sort of live in the what ifs. We really want to make sure that we educate the community and that at the back end, then we study the job that we did in educating them and how they interacted with these long ballots, as the assembly member said. That's one of my biggest concerns personally, is just how complex and long these ballots are going to look, and how that may turn off voters. But again, that's just me. We need to go and analyze and really work with those numbers and those experiences.
I have to say, I really liked your answer to that question. That was, well, because you really explained it and you said, you know what, there's plenty of possibilities, but you know, New York is so complex. Let's watch and see what happens. Assemblyman, you were one of, I'm going to put it in a funny way, you were one of the early supporters of early voting, and you advocated for it. And I think without question during the November election, it was a wide success, with the caveat that there were many long lines. And I know we had to plan, when are you going out, what time, you know, we don't want to wait 6 hours. How do you view what happened with early voting in November, and what potential solutions would you suggest?
I think early voting was a smashing success. I think we should do everything we can to make it convenient and easy for people to cast their vote. The reason why there were lines in November were because there weren't enough early voting sites, and there weren't enough personnel that you would need to have the additional early voting sites. When we first debated the early voting bill in the Assembly, I stood up there and I said, we're going to need many more early voting sites than what was being talked about for counties like the Bronx. My own polling site had long lines, especially on the first 2 days. And if the people in those areas were divided into 2 separate polling sites, you wouldn't have had such long lines. It's simple math. So when people complain about it, and by the way, most voters were thrilled. They were waiting in line for an hour, 2 hours. Most people didn't complain because they were so eager to vote that it didn't matter. But the fact is, so my polling site was the Intech school, HS 368. It took in all the voters of Riverdale and most of the voters of Kingsbridge. It didn't take a genius to figure out that you could have a site for Riverdale, a second site for Kingsbridge, so that you didn't have so many people concentrated in one place. And that would have been true for some of the other early voting sites. Monroe College was another place that had a huge number of voters assigned to it, but it takes money. We need more early voting sites, and it takes money. However, we should all keep in mind that was a presidential election. No other election is going to come close to a presidential election, including the mayoral race. So we may not need quite as many as we think, but we're going to still need more. And I think we should expand the number of early voting sites. We should make it convenient for people to vote.
Ms. Swatek, how are we doing with funding for, the Campaign Finance Board has an idea about these things. How are we doing for funding for the kinds of things that the Assemblyman said? Or do you want to tell him right away, get up to Albany and let's raise a little more money for it?
Well, I know the city board is mostly funded locally by the city budget, but I will say that we did analysis at the Campaign Finance Board looking at how many voters were assigned to each early voting site. Our data manager did a fantastic job of taking a look at that and noticing the discrepancies. There are sites where only 7,000 people are assigned. And of course, I'm saying assigned because you have to go to the site that you're assigned to. As a voter. And then there were sites like Madison Square Garden, which had almost 200,000 voters assigned to it for early voting, which we know MSG is a huge stadium, but that's a lot of voters.
That is, I know the numbers, that's 10 times the size of Madison Square Garden.
Right. So we have, there are discrepancies, I think, in who's assigned to what location. I think that more than just money, though, the Board of Elections has a tremendous job on their hands to find sites and ask them to give up a part of that site for 10 days of early voting. I think that it would be great if they had more flexibility, perhaps only having locations that are open on the weekend. You said, there were a lot of lines on the weekend, but then during the week, there weren't that many. So having that flexibility would be great.
Got it. Before we run out of time, I'm going to ask a yes or no question. Of course, one of the things that the advantages you had with Madison Square Garden is the Rangers and Knicks weren't around because they weren't playing. And so you had access to the facility. If you're going to go back in November and look at Madison Square Garden, under normal times, they're pretty busy. I got to tell you, you're not going to have any days. Anyway, let's go around real quick. Yes or no? Do you like the idea of same-day registration for voting? In other words, that you could do it and you do it. So, Ms. Swatek, yes or no? You like it? You don't like it?
Yes.
Like it. Assemblyman, you like it?
I like it, and I co-sponsored the constitutional amendment to make it happen, and we're going to vote in November on it.
I got to guess that Juan Rosa likes it too.
We do.
So there we go. We have 3 votes. There's no ranked choice voting here. There it is. It passes, and that will be the next thing. It's unanimous. Listen, we'll get all the information up there for ranked choice voting. Allie Swatek from our friends at the New York City Campaign Finance Board, thank you so much. Juan Rosa, boy, you are just out there taking care of Bronxites, and we couldn't appreciate what you and NALEO does any more than we do. Thank you so much. And also, Assemblyman Jeff Dinowitz, I know voting is high on your political agenda, and we really appreciate your joining us this evening. Folks, that's it. We're going to take the rest of the night off, and we'll see you next week. We have some very big political programs coming up. We'll be doing all the debates and the special elections and the regular elections and the primaries. So just stick around on Bronx Talk every week. Thanks to our producer, Stephen Powell, and we'll see you next week. Good night.